Okay, so what if modern religion is actually missing the biggest secret in human history? I know it's a massive, incredibly provocative question, but today we're going to explore the work of an author who has spent over 4 decades trying to answer it. We are diving headfirst into a wildly detailed, highly controversial alternative history, one that really challenges the very foundations of Western religious traditions.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a behemoth of a multi-volume project called The Image of God. But more specifically, we're going to take an objective look at the guy who actually wrote it, Zeinung Al-Mawlid. We're going to dig into exactly who he is, the incredibly fascinating reasons he gives for conceptualizing this entire thing, and then we'll take a step back to assess the staggering scope of his lifelong effort as an author and researcher.
Here's how we're going to break this all down today. First, we'll look at the man behind the book, then his incredible airport epiphany, followed by how he completely redefines the divine. After that, we'll dive into his most explosive claim, the Messiah bloodline, and wrap up by assessing this absolutely massive, lifelong effort.
All right, so let's kick things off with part 1, the man behind the book. Because to truly grasp this text, you absolutely have to understand the author.
Zeinung Al-Mawlid is not your typical theologian. He isn't some tenured university historian either. He's an independent researcher. And his journey into all of this actually started decades ago, back when he was just a kid. He describes literally sitting in Sunday school, raising his hand, and asking these intense, critical questions about the authenticity of key Christian doctrines. And, his teachers simply couldn't give him satisfying answers. So that early curiosity really planted a seed. Born in 1961 in Volda, Norway, Al-Mawlid didn't go straight into academia. Get this, he actually graduated with a degree in logistics. He spent years working in transport, traveling the globe to places like the Middle East, the Far East, North America, and Somalia. And that global, real-world perspective, it's absolutely crucial to his methodology. It wasn't until a very specific event in 1998 that triggered his deep dive, which eventually led to him publishing his findings starting in 2012. Which brings us right to part 2, the airport epiphany. Because every massive undertaking has an inciting incident, right? That one spark that sets the whole thing in motion. Picture this. It's March 28, 1998. Al-Mawlid is hanging out at Fornebu Airport in Oslo, just waiting for his wife's plane to land from Brazil. Just to kill some time, he wanders into a small bookstore and spots this book with a gold chalice on the cover. It's Lawrence Gardner's Bloodline of the Holy Grail. He skims it, is instantly captivated, buys it, and just devours it over the next few days. Then, he starts checking Gardner's genealogical charts against his very own family ancestry research, and to his absolute shock, he finds a connection. This discovery totally shook him to his core. He writes this really powerful line: "My entire childhood faith had to be dismantled before I finally managed to find the fundamentally fatal flaws in the teaching of Christianity." He felt this deep, profound sense of betrayal by Orthodox teachings. He realized that to find what he believed was the true knowledge, he had to look entirely outside the established church. And that feeling, that is exactly the reason he conceptualized the image of God. It became his personal mission to rebuild his understanding of the world from the ground up. So, moving into part 3, redefining the divine. Once he completely dismantled his childhood faith, how did he actually go about reconstructing it? Well, he does it by contrasting Orthodox views directly with his own alternative perspective. Traditionally, we tend to frame God as this supernatural ruler, almost like a heavenly king who directly intervenes in politics and human affairs. But Al-Mawlid assesses historical religious development and argues that, basically, ancient kings imagined a heavenly king, and empires imagined a cosmic ruler just to legitimize their own earthly power. Al-Mawlid's view completely flips this. He frames God as an underlying reality, a universal consciousness that completely transcends human language and our ordinary everyday experience. He crystallizes this whole idea in what he calls Hypothesis 100. Throughout his work, he puts forward exactly 100 hypotheses, and this final one is his core theological conclusion. He argues that the concept we call God isn't best understood as some supernatural dictator. Instead, all these different images of God throughout history are really just humanity's flawed, culturally bound attempts to describe a transcendent reality. He suggests that ancient descriptions of God honestly tell us a whole lot more about the cultures that wrote them than they do about an actual physical deity. And that foundational shift perfectly sets the stage for part 4, the Messiah bloodline.
This is undeniably the most explosive and controversial claim in his entire thesis. Building on the work of researchers like Lawrence Gardner, Al-Malih dives headfirst into the highly controversial hypothesis that Jesus actually survived the crucifixion, lived to an old age, married, specifically Mary Magdalene, and left biological heirs. And he doesn't stop there. He claims that the church hierarchy has spent 2,000 years deliberately concealing this physical Messiah bloodline. Why? Because biological heirs would logically pose a massive existential threat to the church's institutional authority. But here's what's really fascinating. Al-Malih doesn't just leave this as some grand, sweeping 2,000-year-old historical mystery. He brings it quite literally into his own backyard. He uses his intense genealogical effort to map this alleged bloodline as it migrated through European royalty and directly into Norwegian nobility. He lists specific noble families, the Aga, Benkstock, Smør, Losne, and several others. He even claims that characters like Duke Skule and various medieval Norwegian kings were active carriers of this exact messianic legacy. Finally, Part 5, Assessing a Lifelong Effort. To really wrap up our explainer of his work, we need to zoom out and look at what Al-Malih actually accomplished as an author, regardless of whether conventional scholarship accepts his conclusions.
When you assess his performance as an independent researcher, the sheer magnitude of his undertaking is just staggering. I mean, he didn't just write about genealogy. Over 40 years, he arm-wrestled with an insanely broad range of cross-disciplinary source materials. He synthesized ancient Mesopotamian myths of the Anunnaki to question the biological origins of early humanity. He painstakingly detailed Norse voyages to North America centuries before Columbus even set sail. He analyzed the Templar Knights, decoded secrets in religious texts, and mapped out underground passageways in Jerusalem. He's essentially acting as a synthesizer of alternative history on a truly epic scale. To really put that effort into perspective, let me give you a staggering number: 300,000. That is the modest estimate Al-Malih calculates for the number of living Norwegians today who might actually share this hidden Messiah bloodline. It just highlights the incredibly vast scope of his genealogical mapping. Think about it. He essentially wrote this massive book to tell hundreds of thousands of his fellow citizens that they might be part of a legacy that history has actively tried to erase. So that leaves us with one massive, lingering question to close out this explainer. Through decades of absolutely relentless research, Sveinung Al-Malih challenges us to ask, are our myths just symbolic stories? Or are they the distorted, encoded memories of our true origins? Whether you find yourself agreeing with his bold hypotheses or you strictly side with conventional scholarship, Al-Malih's lifelong effort really forces us to deeply examine the boundary between established history and the forgotten secrets of our past. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope this leaves you incredibly curious to keep questioning the history we've all been taught.